1911. That was the number of confirmed kills Imani Jackson recorded during her storied career as a Green Beret sniper. It was a number whispered in hushed tones among soldiers and etched into the scars of enemies she had taken down on distant battlefields across 3 continents. Yet those lethal skills and that fierce precision were relics of a past life that Imani had long since left behind. Today, she was no longer the soldier cloaked in stealth and burdened with orders. She was a single mother tending to her modest family farm, Ebony Acres, nestled in the rolling countryside of rural Mississippi. The early morning light broke gently over the horizon, casting a soft glow over acres of tilled earth and weathered wooden fences. Imani moved with deliberate grace as she inspected the perimeter of her land. Her calloused hands, once steady on a sniper's trigger, now caressed the rough surface of each fence post she repaired with the same military precision she had once applied in the heat of combat. Even as she prepared for the county fair by baking sweet potato pies in her small, time-worn kitchen, her eyes never ceased to scan the horizon, ever alert to any unusual movement. There was an intensity in her gaze that spoke of a past filled with danger, a past that had taught her never to let her guard down, even in moments of domestic calm. Ebony Acres was more than just a place of work and refuge. It was a sanctuary built with blood, sweat, and tears over many long years. Imani had inherited the land from her late husband, a kind man who had supported her transition from military service to civilian life. Determined to create a safe haven for her children, she had poured every ounce of her strength into the farm. The fields stretched toward distant, hazy ridges, and the sound of wind rustling through golden wheat provided a gentle, constant rhythm to everyday life. But beneath that veneer of pastoral peace lay a tension that few outsiders could ever suspect. It was on one such morning, as the dew still clung to the earth and the air shimmered with the heat that would later come, that trouble began to stir. Far down the main road, a cloud of dust heralded the arrival of a black motorcycle convoy. The vehicles, sleek and menacing, carried riders whose eyes burned with reckless ambition. They were members of the Raven Riders MC, an outlaw gang notorious for terrorizing small communities, seizing land, and forcing local business owners to pay extortion fees. To most, they looked like nothing more than a band of thugs out for easy targets. They saw only a struggling farmer, a woman who, to their eyes, was vulnerable and weak. But they did not know Imani Jackson. They did not know that the woman tending Ebony Acres had spent 2 decades perfecting the art of elimination, that every measured step she took was guided by instincts honed on the battlefields of the world. As the Raven Riders rolled into town, their leather jackets emblazoned with ominous insignias and their bikes thundering like the approach of storm, they assumed they were looking at an easy mark. Their leader, a tall man with a scarred face and eyes that flickered with cruel delight, signaled his crew to circle the farm. In their minds, the plan was simple: intimidate the owner, extort money for protection, and then move on. Unbeknownst to them, Imani had long prepared for such an encounter. The day before, she had received a tip from a trusted friend about a group of bikers seen prowling near neighboring farms. Though she had hoped they were merely passing through, her instincts had screamed that something was amiss. With quiet determination, she had spent the previous evening checking and reinforcing hidden compartments and secret storage spaces on her property. Behind a false wall of old hay bales in her barn lay her modified M486 sniper rifle, tactical gear, and enough ammunition to hold off an entire militia. It was her silent promise that she would protect her land, her children, and the legacy of Ebony Acres from any who dared threaten them. At dawn, as Imani walked the eastern fence line, her eyes caught the first glimpse of movement. In the distance, past the wheat fields that swayed gently in the breeze, she saw the glint of chrome and the roar of engines. Her heart, though steeled by years of combat and loss, skipped a beat as she recognized the unmistakable silhouette of motorcycles. With a swift motion, she ducked behind a row of cornstalks and peered toward the road. The riders were approaching steadily, their formation tight and their intentions dark. There was a coldness in their eyes that belied the casual swagger of lawless men. Imani's mind raced with memories of far-off conflicts and close calls in hostile territories. She remembered the countless hours spent in hidden positions under the scorching sun and freezing nights, learning to read the enemy's movements, to calculate angles and anticipate every threat. Now, standing on her own land, she was forced to reawaken those skills. With steady determination, she retraced her steps back to the farmhouse, where her daughter, Aisha, and her young son, Malik, were beginning their morning routines. Aisha, 14 years old and wise beyond her years, had inherited her mother's alertness. As she helped prepare breakfast, her eyes darted to the window and noted the approaching dust cloud. "Mama," she said softly, a hint of fear threading through her tone, "I think there's something coming down the road." Malik, only 8, looked up from the bowl of cereal, his face scrunched in confusion, but the worry in his eyes betrayed his understanding. Imani's expression remained composed as she reassured her children, though her mind was already forming a plan. "Stay inside and do what I told you," she instructed in a low, commanding voice. "I will handle this." Without a moment's hesitation, Imani retrieved her old radio transceiver from a drawer, a relic of her past that still functioned perfectly, and sent a coded message to a trusted neighbor, Mr. Henderson, who had once served alongside her in covert operations. "Boys, the Raven Riders are here. Stand by and secure the perimeter." Her voice crackled in calm authority. She then moved to the barn, her footsteps silent on the cool, dew-soaked ground, and entered the hidden compartment behind the hay bales. There, the familiar weight of her sniper rifle and tactical gear reaffirmed her sense of purpose. She had hoped never to have to use these again, but circumstances, as always, rarely allowed for gentle resolutions. The sound of motorcycle engines grew louder, accompanied by the rough shouts of the gang members. Outside, the Raven Riders began their reconnaissance, circling the farm with practiced nonchalance. Their leader, known among his peers as Razor, dismounted from his bike and strolled along the fence line. "This is just another struggling farmer," he sneered to his cohorts. "We'll break her spirit, extort some cash, and be on our way." He gestured dismissively toward the patchwork of fields and dilapidated structures that made up Ebony Acres. As Razor and his crew drew closer, Imani's eyes narrowed. She pressed her back against the cool, rough surface of the barn wall and surveyed the approaching threat through a pair of binoculars she kept close at hand. Every detail was noted: the number of bikes, the positions of the riders, even the subtle shifts in their formation that betrayed their tactical training. Her military mind quickly assessed that these were not just random drifters. They were organized, experienced, and driven by a desire to take control of what they believed was an easy target. Meanwhile, in the small town nearby, news of the gang's presence had already begun to circulate. Local business owners whispered nervously about recent extortion attempts on struggling farms, and the community's uneasy tolerance of such threats was wearing thin. Yet none had anticipated that the woman behind Ebony Acres would be someone who had once faced down far more dangerous foes on distant battlefields. As the morning wore on, the Raven Riders began to make their presence felt. They stopped by the town diner, exchanging coarse words with the proprietor, and then drove slowly past the farm, as if to leave a mark. It was then that Razor, his eyes scanning the horizon with a predatory intensity, spotted something unusual, a figure moving deliberately along the edge of the property, pausing to check fence posts and examine the ground. His suspicion was aroused. "Something's not right here," he muttered under his breath, his hand resting on the grip of his handgun. "Keep your eyes open, boys. We might have more than just a simple farmer on our hands." Back at the farmhouse, Imani had already set her plan into motion. She emerged from the barn with the calm assurance of someone who had faced countless adversaries before. Dressed in worn tactical gear that still bore the marks of her past, her eyes were steely and focused. As she approached the main house, she could hear the low murmur of the gang members on their bikes and the distant rumble of engines. With a fluid motion, she stepped into the open, her posture relaxed yet ready for combat. "Who's there?" Razor called out, his voice echoing across the open fields as he spotted her. His tone was mocking, as if he expected to find only a meek old woman, not the formidable figure before him. Imani's response was measured and steady. "I'm the owner of this land," she said, her voice carrying an edge of authority that brooked no argument. "If you're looking for trouble, you are about to find it." For a moment, silence fell over the field as the gang members exchanged uncertain glances. They had not expected resistance, let alone such a calm, unwavering declaration. Razor's smile faltered as he studied Imani's face, a face that bore the determined expression of a seasoned warrior. "We're just here to collect what's due," he replied slowly, attempting to mask his growing apprehension with bravado. "A little protection fee for the work you do on this land." His words dripped with condescension, but Imani was unmoved. "Your protection fee is not welcome here," she said softly but with a firmness that brooked no dissent. "This land belongs to my family, and it will remain so." In that instant, the air seemed to crackle with tension. The Outlaws had expected an easy mark, but they had encountered someone who was not only unyielding, but clearly prepared for battle. The confrontation escalated quickly. Razor signaled his riders to advance, their motorcycles forming a tight, intimidating circle around the farmhouse. Imani retreated a few steps, her eyes never leaving the enemy, and reached for a compact communication device hidden in her pocket. "All units, this is Jackson," she transmitted in a calm, coded voice that betrayed no fear. "We have an incursion on site. Request immediate backup and confirm that local allies are in position." The signal went out across the small network of local supporters, a motley crew of retired soldiers, former law enforcement officers, and vigilant neighbors who had once been afraid to speak out. In the distance, the sound of approaching vehicles confirmed that help was on the way. But time was of the essence. The gang, realizing that their initial plans were unraveling, began to tighten their formation and raise their weapons. Razor, frustrated by the unexpected resistance, advanced toward Imani with a sneer. "You think you can scare us off with talk?" he challenged, drawing his own weapon with a practiced flourish. The tension in the field reached a fever pitch as both sides braced for the inevitable clash. Imani's mind raced through tactical scenarios with the clarity of someone who had spent years on covert missions. She knew that the element of surprise and precision would be her greatest allies. Before a shot could be fired, a loud crack rang out from the tree-line at the far side of the field. A flash of movement, swift, silent, and deadly, caused several of the gang members to drop their weapons in shock. It was a warning shot, expertly aimed at disarming the threat without killing. The Outlaws faltered, their aggression momentarily replaced by uncertainty. Razor's eyes darted toward the source of shot. "Who's there?" he barked, but there was no immediate answer. Instead, a series of coordinated movements unfolded. From behind the cover of large oak trees and amidst the tall corn stalks, a group of local volunteers, veterans, former police officers, and brave residents emerged, taking strategic positions around the perimeter of the farm. Their presence was a silent affirmation that Ebony Acres, rebranded in their hearts as Ebony Stronghold, was not an easy target for the lawless. For a long moment, the standoff seemed to stretch indefinitely. The Outlaws, caught off guard by the sudden resistance, exchanged looks of disbelief. They had underestimated this land, underestimated the woman who now stood before them with the steady gaze of a warrior. Imani, her heart pounding but her voice steady, addressed the assembled riders. "This is my home," she said, her tone carrying both authority and the quiet assurance of someone who had seen too much to be intimidated. "If you wish to continue down this path, you will find that every inch of this land is defended. I have fought enemies far more dangerous than you, and I will not allow you to take what is mine." Her words resonated in the still morning air, and slowly, the resolve of the gang began to waver. Razor, his face a mask of disbelief and mounting frustration, scowled and gestured for his men to regroup. "We're not done here," he snarled, his voice low and dangerous. "I expect you to leave, or things will get very messy." But Imani's stance was unyielding, her posture a blend of calm determination and latent ferocity. She had no intention of cowering before these men. She would rather fight than let them trample on her hard-won peace. The minutes ticked by like hours as the standoff continued. In the background, the rumble of approaching backup grew louder, a steady reminder that the community had rallied behind her. Yet the confrontation was far from over. The gang, realizing that their numbers might be outmatched, began to employ psychological tactics, mocking shouts, taunts, and attempts to provoke Imani into a rash decision. But she remained calm, her mind focused on the objective: protect her children, her land, and the legacy of the life she had built far from the battlefields of her past. As the first hints of midday warmth began to creep over the horizon, the tension broke when a pair of rugged pickup trucks pulled up alongside the road. Local law enforcement, reinforcements from neighboring towns, and even a couple of former comrades from Imani's military days arrived on the scene. Their presence tipped the scales, and a murmur of uncertainty spread among the gang members. Razor, now visibly agitated, signaled his riders to withdraw, though he did so with a final glare that promised retribution. With the immediate threats subdued, Imani allowed herself a brief moment to exhale. But the calm was deceptive. She knew that the outlaws would not be easily deterred, and that this encounter was merely the opening salvo in a larger conflict that threatened the safety of her family and her community. In the ensuing hours, she gathered her children inside the farmhouse, securing doors and windows, and contacted local allies to bolster the defenses of Ebony Acres. Every action was deliberate, every movement calculated as she drew on the years of tactical training that had once made her a formidable sniper. The rest of the day was spent in a whirlwind of preparation. Neighbors arrived with supplies and a determination to stand together, and former military friends offered their expertise in setting up defensive positions around the property. Imani coordinated with them over a crackling radio, issuing orders and reminders with a voice that brooked no dissent. "Remember, we hold this ground," she instructed, "not with brute force alone, but with precision and the unity of our community. Every farmer, every family here must be vigilant. We protect our home as if our lives depend on it, because they do." As dusk approached, the atmosphere on Ebony Acres shifted from one of immediate crisis to a determined readiness. The outlaws might have retreated for the moment, but Imani knew that they would return. The Raven Riders, as they were now called in hushed tones by the locals, were relentless and experienced in using fear to force submission. But Imani's resolve was stronger. She had faced down enemies on distant battlefields. She had seen the cost of complacency. And now, she would stand firm for the sake of her children, her neighbors, and the heritage of Ebony Acres. The twilight deepened into night, and the stars emerged one by one above the Mississippi sky. Under the cloak of darkness, Imani took a solitary walk around the perimeter of her farm, her eyes scanning every shadow for signs of movement. In the stillness of the night, every creak of wood and rustle of leaves was a potential harbinger of danger. Her mind, ever alert, replayed the earlier confrontation with a clarity born of experience. She recalled the look in Razor's eyes, the snarl in his voice, and the way her own heartbeat had pounded like a drum in her ears. It was a reminder that even in moments of relative calm, the threat of violence loomed large. Yet in that darkness, there was also a fierce sense of hope. The community had rallied, and the bonds of solidarity among the residents of Fox Hollow had been strengthened by the confrontation. Imani's children, Aisha and Malik, slept soundly that night, cocooned in the knowledge that their mother was not only a caretaker, but a warrior who would defend them at all costs. And in the hearts of the neighbors, a quiet determination had taken root, a belief that no one, no matter how ruthless, could ever break the spirit of a community united by compassion and resolve. The night passed slowly, and as dawn crept over the horizon, Imani prepared herself for what might come next. She checked her hidden armory once more, ensuring that every weapon was in place and every tactical plan was ready to be executed at a moment's notice. With a deep, steadying breath, She vowed silently that she would not allow the dark intentions of the Raven Riders to undo all that she had built. Her past as a Green Beret sniper had taught her the value of patience and precision, and now those lessons were more vital than ever. In the days that followed, Fox Hollow became a crucible of transformation. The incident with the Outlaws spread through the region like wildfire, igniting debates about the safety of small communities and the lengths to which a determined individual could go to protect her home. Local media portrayed Imani not merely as a retired soldier turned farmer, but as a guardian whose resolve was as unyielding as the land she tilled. Interviews with neighbors and former comrades painted a picture of a woman who had sacrificed the life of violence for the promise of peace, only to find that peace was a fragile state that required constant vigilance. In a quiet moment during a community meeting held at the town hall, a veteran who had once served under Imani's command recalled her extraordinary skill in the field. She could take down a target from over a kilometer away, he said, his voice filled with pride and reverence. But when she hung up her rifle to raise her children and tend to her farm, she never forgot that her duty was to protect. And when the time came, she did not hesitate to reclaim her strength. His words resonated with the assembled crowd, who listened intently as he recounted tales of daring missions and narrow escapes that had become the stuff of legend among those who knew her past. Meanwhile, the Raven Riders, chastened by their failed attempt to extort Ebony Acres, began regrouping and planning their next move. Their leader, Razor, seethed with anger and humiliation. He could not fathom how a woman they had dismissed as weak and insignificant had so effortlessly defied them. In secret meetings held in dimly lit garages and abandoned warehouses, the gang members plotted their revenge, determined to prove that no one could resist the might of their criminal organization. They vowed that the next time they came, they would leave no doubt as to who ruled the small towns of the region. But Imani, ever resolute, continued to fortify her defenses. She trained with local volunteers, teaching them basic self-defense and tactical positioning. In the quiet hours before dawn, she led drills in the fields, her voice firm yet encouraging. Real strength does not come from brute force, she explained to a group of wide-eyed farmers and young recruits, but from protecting what matters. We must learn to watch for every sign, every shadow that moves in the wrong direction. We must be ready to defend our home with everything we have. Her words sparked a fire in the hearts of those who had long been resigned to the tyranny of outlaws and corrupt officials. Slowly but surely, the community transformed. Neighbors who had once lived in fear began to organize patrols and build makeshift fortifications. The spirit of resistance, once a distant memory, was rekindled with every passing day. Even the local sheriff, a gruff man with a reputation for being unyielding, began to take notice of the growing unity among the residents. "If we stand together, no one can break us," he declared in a rare moment of vulnerability during a town meeting. As summer advanced, the threat of the Raven Riders loomed large over Fox Hollow, but so did the promise of redemption and strength. Imani's farm became a symbol not only of her personal journey from soldier to farmer, but of the collective resilience of a community that refused to be intimidated. The scars of past battles, both on the battlefield and on the quiet acres of Ebony Acres, merged into a narrative of defiance and hope that resonated far beyond the borders of the small town. In one particularly memorable evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in shades of crimson and gold, Imani stood at the edge of her field, gazing out toward the distant hills. The soft hum of cicadas filled the air, and the cool breeze carried whispers of change. Her mind drifted to the days of her past, when she had lived in the shadow of enemy fire and the constant threat of death. Now, her battlefield was different, a quiet rural landscape that demanded vigilance and care rather than lethal precision. And yet, the determination that had once driven her to eliminate high-value targets now propelled her to defend her home and her community with equal ferocity. That night, as she returned to the farmhouse, her children waiting anxiously by the window, Imani felt a quiet pride swell within her. "We are safe for now," she told them softly. "But remember, we must always be ready. Our strength comes from our unity and our determination to protect what is ours." Aisha and Malik nodded, their young faces reflecting both the innocence of childhood and the premature understanding of the burdens they had inherited. In the weeks and months that followed, Fox Hollow experienced a gradual yet unmistakable transformation. The failed extortion attempt by the Raven Riders had not only unified the community, but had also drawn attention from nearby towns and even regional authorities. Law enforcement agencies, previously hesitant to intervene in what they considered isolated incidents, now began to coordinate efforts to clamp down on organized crime in the area. Meanwhile, local residents, emboldened by Imani's courage, initiated grassroots programs to rebuild and revitalize their neighborhoods. At community centers, farmers and shopkeepers gathered to share resources and form mutual aid networks. The once isolated farm of Imani Jackson became the nerve center for a burgeoning movement. A movement that aimed to restore dignity and safety to all those who had long suffered under the thumb of criminal gangs. Volunteers set up workshops on self-defense and community organization, and local schools introduced programs that taught children the importance of civic responsibility and the power of collective action. Despite these hopeful developments, the threat of the Raven Riders was never far from the minds of the residents. Razor and his gang had not forgotten their failed attempt, and in secret, they planned further incursions. Late at night, as the moon cast long shadows over Fox Hollow, the sound of distant engines and the faint roar of motorcycles would send ripples of tension through the community. But each time, Imani and her allies met these challenges head-on. Through a series of calculated countermeasures, including hidden surveillance points and coordinated patrols, the residents gradually turned the tables on their would-be oppressors. One fateful evening, as a new group of outlaws approached under the cover of darkness, Imani took her position atop a small hill overlooking the farm. With the practiced ease of a sniper returning to a familiar stance, she scanned the darkened road with her binoculars. Her keen eyes caught every detail: the number of riders, the type of motorcycles, and even the glint of weapons under the moonlight. Quietly, she communicated with her network over a secure radio channel, relaying precise coordinates and instructions. "Hold your positions," she murmured in a voice that was both calm and steely. "They are here. Do not let them breach our perimeter." The ensuing clash was swift and fierce. Outlaws, confident in their superior numbers, advanced in tight formation, their headlights slicing through the darkness. But they were met with a defense that was both relentless and meticulously planned. Local volunteers, many of whom had received training from Imani herself, emerged from concealed positions. The sound of controlled gunfire mixed with shouts and the clamor of motorcycles, creating a chaotic symphony of resistance. In the midst of the fray, Imani's presence was like that of a ghost, silent, deadly, and determined to ensure that her hard-won peace would not be shattered. The battle raged until the first light of dawn crept over the horizon. By then, the outlaws had been forced into a disorganized retreat, leaving behind a field littered with the remnants of their failed assault. In the aftermath, as the community gathered to tend to their wounded and assess the damage, a sense of renewed purpose filled the air. Fox Hollow had been tested in the crucible of violence, and through it all, the spirit of its people had emerged stronger than ever. In the following days, Imani's leadership became a rallying point for the entire region. Stories of her courage spread quickly, and people from neighboring towns began to seek her guidance and support. Meetings were held in town halls and community centers, where discussions about safety, self-reliance, and the importance of standing together in the face of adversity took center stage. The local sheriff, once dismissive of small-town challenges, acknowledged the need for a new approach, one that integrated the resourcefulness of local residents with the strategic insights of trained veterans. One afternoon, as Imani walked along the edge of her property, she paused to look out over the vast expanse of land that had become her life's work. The golden light of a setting sun bathed the fields in warmth, and for a fleeting moment, the scars of past battles seemed to soften. Yet in her eyes shone a determination that spoke of unyielding resolve. We may not have the power of armies, she thought, but together we have something stronger, the will to protect what is ours, to ensure that our children grow up in a world where they are safe and free. Her internal vow was a promise to herself, her family, and every person in her community that no matter what came next, she would be ready. In the months that followed, Fox Hollow underwent a slow but remarkable transformation. The relentless vigilance and unity of its residents began to pay off, and the specter of the Raven Riders receded into the background. Yet, the memories of those tense nights, the adrenaline of near battle, and the quiet triumph of holding the line would remain etched in the hearts of those who had fought to defend their home. Imani continued to lead by example, training local youths in self-defense and emergency preparedness, ensuring that every generation knew that true strength lay not in isolation, but in the collective power of a community united by common purpose. At community celebrations, as children danced and families shared stories of the past, Imani would often be seen quietly watching from a distance, a solitary sentinel guarding the legacy of Ebony Acres. In the gentle laughter of her children, in the determined expressions of neighbors who had once lived in fear, she saw the future taking shape, a future built on resilience, cooperation, and the unbreakable bonds of shared experience. Her transformation from a feared sniper to a compassionate guardian became a beacon of hope for all who knew her story. In local schools, teachers recounted the tale of the fearless farmer who had turned the tide against marauding outlaws, inspiring countless young minds to believe that courage and conviction could indeed change the world. And in the quiet moments, when the wind whispered through the golden fields of Fox Hollow, one could almost hear the echoes of a time when a single woman's resolve redefined the destiny of an entire community. As the seasons changed, so too did the challenges of Fox Hollow. New threats emerged: greedy developers, corrupt officials, and even rival gangs who sought to take advantage of the renewed prosperity. Yet, every time, Imani and her allies met these challenges head-on, drawing upon the lessons of their past and the strength of their unity. The struggles were many and the scars deep, but each victory, no matter how small, reaffirmed the truth that together they could overcome even the darkest of adversities. One crisp autumn morning, during a town meeting held at the modest community center, Imani stood before an audience of farmers, shopkeepers, and local leaders. With her eyes bright and her voice resonant with authority, she reminded everyone of the lessons learned from those harrowing nights. "We have faced our demons and stood together in the face of terror," she declared. "Let our unity be our shield, and our compassion the sword that defends our homes. We are not victims. We are survivors, and together we will build a future where every voice is heard and every heart is safe." Her words, simple yet powerful, stirred the crowd into a fervor of determination and hope. In the wake of that meeting, initiatives were launched to revitalize the town. Local businesses received grants, new schools were built, and health clinics were established to ensure that no resident would be left behind. The once forlorn fields of Ebony Acres were transformed into thriving orchards and community gardens, symbols of the fertile ground not only of the land but of hope and possibility. And through it all, Imani remained at the heart of it, a steadfast guardian whose past as a soldier had given her the strength to protect a future built on dreams rather than fear. The story of Fox Hollow and Ebony Acres, with its trials and tribulations, became a legend told in hushed, reverent tones among neighboring communities. It was a story of redemption and resilience, of a woman who had once been forged in the crucible of war and had chosen instead to sow the seeds of peace on her own patch of earth. Her journey was not without pain or sacrifice, but it was a testament to the enduring power of a single individual to inspire change. And as the sun set each day over the golden fields, its light mingling with the cool evening breeze, Imani Jackson stood as a living reminder that even the most dangerous predators could be tamed by the unwavering spirit of those who fought to protect what mattered most. Thus, the battle for Fox Hollow was not fought with the sheer force of military might alone, but with a synergy of community, compassion, and a resolute belief in justice. The Raven Riders may have sought to intimidate and extort, but they never imagined that their path would cross with a woman whose life had been defined by precision, bravery, and an unyielding determination to defend her home. In every field, every fence, and every whispered conversation in the quiet of the night, the legacy of Imani's sacrifice and strength echoed, a clarion call that the power to protect and transform lies within each of us. In time, as peace gradually settled over Fox Hollow and the scars of past battles began to heal, Imani took a quiet moment to reflect on the journey that had brought her to this point. Standing at the edge of a freshly planted orchard, she recalled the distant echoes of gunfire, the shouts of defiance, and the resolute determination that had carried her through the darkest hours. The land, though battered by storms and conflict, had yielded to the nurturing hands of those who believed that together they could create a better future. And in that moment of reflection, as the morning mist gave way to a bright, hopeful day, Imani knew that her true mission was far from over. For every threat that had come and every enemy that had been repelled, a new challenge emerged, a call to continue the work of rebuilding, of inspiring, and of protecting not just her own farm, but every corner of the community that had once been left in the shadows. The legacy of Ebony Acres and Fox Hollow was a living testament to the idea that real strength is measured not by the number of enemies defeated, but by the resilience to stand again after every fall, to nurture hope in the hearts of the forgotten, and to forge bonds that no amount of violence or intimidation could ever break. And so, under the wide, unyielding sky of Mississippi, with the winds of change whispering through the golden wheat and the sturdy fences of her beloved farm, Imani Jackson continued her vigil. The Outlaws may have come with dark intentions, but they had inadvertently sparked a revolution where every soul in Fox Hollow, every farmer, every neighbor, and every child had learned that the power of unity, compassion, and unyielding resolve could transform even the bleakest of landscapes into a beacon of hope. Her story, Shadows over Ebony Acres, became a legend, a narrative of transformation, resilience, and the enduring light of courage that shone through even the darkest of times. It was a story that inspired countless others to rise up, to protect their own homes, and to remember that sometimes the greatest battles are fought not on distant battlefields, but right in the heart of one's own backyard.